Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. My name is Candice Hart. I'm a horticulturist here in Central Illinois, serving Macon, DeWitt, and Piatt counties. I tend to kind of cover the flower topics, annuals, perennials, any kind of home horticultural stuff is what I'm interested in. Kelly, how about you?
My name is Kelly Allsup. I'm also a horticulture educator in Central Illinois. I serve Livingston, McLean, and Woodford County based out of Bloomington. I love flowers too, but I tend to be more on the pest management types of topics. I love talking about butterflies and pollinators. I'm a little into the organic vegetable gardening also. So anything insect related or possibly vegetable related, I might have an opinion on.
Awesome.
And then, of course, everything else.
Plenty to talk about with those today.
And I'm Ryan Pankau, horticulture educator here in Champaign County, covering Fort Vermilion and Iroquois as well. And my expertise is probably in trees and woody plants. That's what I've studied in school and have a lot of experience with. But I, too, am also interested in natives and vegetables, and organic, gardening is a big area of interest of mine. So those are the things I like to talk about.
Cool. So between us three, hopefully we can answer
Yes.
almost any question that comes at us. So you'll see the comment box there below the video. Start to type in those gardening questions. We've got a couple that came in since our last session about 2 weeks ago. So we're going to answer those first, but start typing those questions in. And we're going to start talking about some kind of timely stuff that we've been noticing in the garden. So I believe we got some pictures of bagworms that we're going to pull up here. And some gardeners might have been noticing these, or honestly, a lot of gardeners don't notice these, and that's the problem, is that you'll see these little bags hanging from mostly your conifers. Your evergreens is what they tend to go on the most. So I was actually teaching master gardener training this week, and we took a walk around the office where we were doing training, and that's where a couple of these pictures came from. These shrubs and a couple of the trees were just decimated by bagworms. They had eaten almost all the foliage off. The fire hydrant one was a picture from a colleague. The bagworms were so bad in this particular planting that they made bags on the fire hydrant too.
Yeah, that's impressive.
That's a lot of bagworms. So there's a couple of shrubs where they've just been defoliated by the feeding from these bagworms. So Kelly, can you tell us what's kind of the life cycle of this insect? When is this usually happening?
Well, right now, the female is inside the bag, and she's probably laid eggs already. Mm-hmm. The eggs are going to overwinter in these bags, and then in the spring, these little tiny caterpillars are going to crawl out of the bag, and then they go to the very top of the tree, and either they stay on, or if it's really populated, they start producing little silk, which all caterpillars produce silk, and they do what we call ballooning to
this is super cool.
to other plants.
Yeah, really cool.
It's really cool.
And so it's at that time when you can actually control them with a chemical. Right now, the only thing you can do is pick bags off. And, that might be a great activity for your kid.
But it actually can be a pretty effective thing at limiting your infestation for the next year. Assuming, but those had to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
So if your neighbor's tree is ballooning into your yard, you may not get them all. But I've had pretty good luck with just picking them off.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think when I was researching this, I think it said the female, there's like 300 to 1,000 eggs in those bags, each bag. So if you are picking those off, you're at least eliminating quite a few eggs. So that helps.
What is kind of sad is the female is legless, blind, wingless. She just builds a bag around her when she is a caterpillar. Then she pupates and becomes an adult, and stays in that bag her entire life. And the male actually is flying around and will come and mate with her inside that bag. So
that sucks. Not a fun life for that female.
Oh, it does suck, but she's completely protected.
That's
so
true. She's gonna
she
reproduce.
has
that's for sure.
completely. She's protected from the outside world, which means she's protected from anything that you could possibly think about spraying on her. So that leads to the phenology. We were just talking about this. I love timing pesticides with when other things are blooming. So we're going to bring up a picture of Japanese tree lilac. And it just really is this really kind of cool, small to medium tree.
Yeah, great flowers.
Gorgeous flowers, white flowers. When does it bloom? Like June?
Yeah, I would say early June, mid-June, seems like usually.
Mm-hmm.
So they're starting to cut. The caterpillars are starting to come out a little bit before it blooms, but they're now starting to balloon. And when you actually see Japanese tree lilac in bloom, that's when a chemical spray will be effective for bagworms.
Yeah. So you can't, when they're just hiding in those bags, obviously a chemical's not going to be any
it's such an interesting way to time stuff, too.
It is.
There's a lot of other recommendations that follow the flowering of some other species of plant. And, essentially what it's doing is just counting degree days from January 1st. And we know at a certain number of degree days, these insects will emerge. We know at a certain number of degree days, these plants will flower.
Yeah.
And it just is an easy reminder for me for common timing throughout the year. So
time to do this. Yeah.
That's why every time you look at a Woody's manual and it says flowering, it never says specific
time
of when something flowers. It'll be like early April or mid-March to early April because it always varies each year.
You never know what the weather's going to be like.
And it varies from parts of the state too. So the one consistent thing you have is that it will flower at that same timing that coincides with emergence of the bagworms. So
and one way I know I kind of tend to stay on top of this, at least in the spring, the Home Yard and Garden Pest newsletter, they tend to put in there like a phenology report that tends to help you kind of track things too. So if you don't get the Illinois Home Yard and Garden Pest newsletter in your inbox, you can go and sign up for that, and it's really great info about what's happening timely, like that time of year, which is really helpful.
I love my other favorite, not that I'm don't love Home Yard and Garden Pest newsletter. Believe me, I read it religiously because I want to know what's going on, and they usually are giving me articles about what's going on right then and there. But I love Morton Arboretum Plant Care Health Reports also.
Yeah, that's timely too.
They, they're just a little bit behind me, but usually that really helps me answer questions from the public and know what's going on right then and there.
Yeah, and they're obviously in northern Illinois, which is why you said they're a little behind typically when things are
happening. If you're a procrastinator, it might time things perfectly for central Illinois.
You catch things late, So get on out there, inspect, especially your shrubs, your evergreen trees. Look for those bagworms. They're really easy to see, and do that this time of year. So at least you kind of know what you got going on and start picking those off. Yeah. Very good. So start asking those questions in the comment box there. We've got several questions here from last week that have come in ahead of time. So Rosie had a question last week that all of her pickles, she has pickles in quotes, this year grew as little cucumber-like balls. What did she do wrong? What do you think?
And that was my guess for answering that question, was that she's growing a variety of lemon cucumbers or something that actually does look like a ball and doesn't quite have the same taste as a pickling. So maybe something happened with the seed. Maybe she got the wrong seed, or
plants were mislabeled.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Maybe it was just mislabeled and she didn't quite. Yeah. So Rosie, probably nothing you did. It more than likely just a different variety is what we're thinking.
So I would definitely go and plant some seed next time.
Yeah, don't give up. Try again. And maybe plant a couple of different varieties next year so you have a little bit more guarantee. Yeah.
I personally don't think the lemon cucumbers are that great.
Taste-wise?
Yeah.
They're cute. But
I think they're kind of watery and they don't have that great crunch that cucumbers have. But
so mix it up. Plant a couple.
Some people love it, so...
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we're thinking lemon cucumbers, Rosie. Deborah is asking, any suggestions for fall or winter garden prep? that will discourage pest and disease from returning the following year? And that's definitely a good, timely question. So what can we do this time of year to discourage pest and disease for next year? Well, cleanup is obviously a big thing. So,
but then you're gonna I just wrote an article about this, about what we do wrong in the landscape. We've always been taught, clean the garden up in the fall, make it pristine, because we want to get rid of pests and we want to get rid of diseases. But then what we're doing is we're removing spaces, areas for native bees and beneficial insects and butterflies that overwinter in our gardens. We're eliminating all that room. So I'm personally not a big fan of cleaning up the landscape until in the late spring. It isn't unless you actually have those symptoms.
Yeah,
if it's
a clean
insects.
plant, it's healthy this season. Yeah, definitely leave it. There's no reason. Yeah.
But if it's a rudbeckia with your
we talked about leaf spot. Yeah, leaf spot last week.
Or powdery mildew, then go ahead and clean it up. Or iris borers.
Yeah,
go ahead and clean it up now.
Well, clean up that area. And then another area of your garden can provide that winter habitat.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you don't have to do all of it.
You don't have to
do
clean
parts.
it all. Yeah.
I know when I teach master gardener training, and I actually just taught your master gardeners.
Oh, good.
I'm always like, I'm giving you permission to be a lazy gardener. Meaning it's okay to have a few leaves, and it's okay to, you mulch up those fall leaves and you put them on your garden. You want to mulch them up because you don't want them to be flat. Otherwise what do? Contain moisture.
Yeah, they just kind of form a thick layer that's hard to...
Stick together, make a mat.
Yeah.
But it creates this wonderful space for, ladybugs and overwintering butterflies, even the adults. The butterflies, not every butterfly is like the monarch. Most of them actually stay up here and need a space to overwinter.
Yeah.
Well, and I've related that to folks, kind of like the garden advice of just doing part. So, if you want part of your yard that is like the front where everybody sees it, where you walk up to be nice and clean, that's okay. Find some spots to tuck away some of this habitat. Or, my backyard looks wild and woolly a lot of times.
Just let it go.
Because I'm the only one that sees it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, just conserve some areas that can hold some of this winter habitat.
Definitely.
But then we, as horticulturists, we're different when it comes to vegetable gardens. So, I'm always like, yeah, I do want you to remove all the debris from the vegetable garden and compost it. But I don't always want you to till.
Yeah.
Yeah, I usually explain it on a few different levels. Like your native plantings, don't do anything to them to clean them up.
Yeah.
Your ornamental plantings of flowers and things, there may be a varying level. Your vegetable garden, you probably do a little more cleanup in because, the native and beneficial insects we want that are on your native plantings, we want to keep. But oftentimes, a lot of those insects in the garden, in the vegetable garden, are pests. So if we can do something to disrupt their life cycle, that's usually something we want to do. So,
you tend to have more problems in the vegetable gardens. It's a good idea to clean it up. So there you go, Deborah. So do some of that cleanup, but not necessarily everything this fall and winter. Okay, a couple other questions that came in ahead of time. Keep them coming in the comments. Looks like we've got a couple coming in. We've got two monarch questions here. One, not monarch, milkweed. Sorry, they're so related. Heidi asks, can we talk about milkweed? She has several kinds of perennial seeds that require stratification. Stratification meaning a cold, wet treatment. So would you recommend sowing in the fall or the spring? Well, you kind of just answered that a little bit, and you're on your own there, Heidi.
I think
so.
Did.
If they do require stratification, meaning they need a cold, wet period in order to germinate, then planting in the fall would be your go-to. So you could plant those milkweed seeds outside now in the fall. And then winter will naturally give that cold, wet treatment, and then in the spring, hopefully you've got good germination. So, you could plant them in the spring indoors, but you would need to replicate that cold, wet treatment by putting them in a flat of moist soil, putting them in a fridge for a period of time. So, fall is easier.
Or put the seeds in a paper towel in the refrigerator for
That works
maybe
too.
8 weeks. I don't
Probably
know.
8 to 10, something
Well,
like
and
that.
I tend to kind of focus on how it works in nature.
Yeah.
And I mean, seeding them this fall is exactly how it works in nature, where when you start trying to refrigerate and do things like that,
yeah.
there's just so much room for error on our parts as humans that it kind of gets you into trouble.
Yeah.
I pretty much recommend a fall planting.
You're better off just let nature kind of do its thing for you. It makes it a lot easier.
I think it's fun to separate the floss from the seeds and have the floss flying around everywhere.
Yeah.
Which is how those seeds are
That's how they
spread.
disperse, yeah.
So as soon as those, you want to make sure that they, the seed heads are brown and papery and they're ready to open up, and then that is when you want to take them. Otherwise, they'll be too green. Another one is I love the annual one, and I think you could save that for the spring.
Yeah. In that case, if it is an annual milkweed, then you wouldn't necessarily want to plant that in the fall. You'd want to save that seed, bring it inside, and then replant in the spring. Yeah. Yep. So Sherry also had a kind of a comment more than a question. She said she's a beginner gardener. She has wild milkweed, which is a nuisance, but she's saying, oh my, the beauty of nature, fragrance, and monarchs is something she can deal with. So not really a question, but a great comment. Sherry, is it? Yes, definitely. We're just talking about the seeds. Any of these milkweeds do tend to produce quite a few seeds. That's how they reproduce. So what you can do is you can thin some of it out. So if you, in the spring, when you do see those seeds starting to come up, you can easily pull some of them, not all of it, and kind of thin out your planting a little bit, or you just let them go.
But as a flower person, you recommend 2 particular ones, right?
Well, butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, is my favorite, and I think the most manageable of the milkweeds. It's much shorter. It definitely does spread and kind of get a bigger clump from those seed, but it's a lot more manageable.
It doesn't take over.
It doesn't take over quite as much. What you probably have, Sherry, is probably common or a swamp milkweed, which is taller. It does tend to. I think it's a little bit more on the weedy side, but obviously great for monarchs.
But in some places at my property, that's what I'm going for.
I mean, yeah, it depends your goal. Yeah,
I want it to fill in and smother out all the weeds.
If you're trying to like plant a prairie and just let it go, then let it go. Yeah, enjoy it. Yeah. Excellent comment, Sherry. Keep going with the milkweed. Dorothy had a question here. What is the best time to plant garlic in north central Illinois, and some best cultivation practices? So, you vegetable peeps, when do you plant the garlic?
Well, is the recommendation like 6 weeks before the first frost? I think that's
somewhere in that time range.
Somewhere around that range.
Sometimes I tell people it's, late October, early November.
Yeah, I've really pushed the limit of that. And, for the last 13 years or so, I've been gardening in southern Illinois, where you do have a little warmer temperatures than central Illinois, northern Illinois. But I remember in southern Illinois planting it as late as the end of November, like during deer season. And that wasn't planned. That was due to procrastination on my part. And that was a really successful planting. So the issue for me is that I don't ever want my garlic to get too much top growth before winter hits, because it wastes a lot of energy on that and then gets knocked back in the wintertime. So that's why I've always kind of liked to push that limit a little later, so you just get a little tiny bit of green maybe coming up before winter hits. But really, it's pretty adaptable. And, some of it has to do with individual varieties requirements. You may want to pay attention to that. I know there's some that are sensitive to planting too late. And I can't say that I have specifically selected varieties that aren't, that I've planted late, but it's really been for me over the years probably one of the most productive crops out of our garden. I mean, it's a great one to grow.
I mean, you just kind of plant it and let it go.
And, I mean, the timing of the season that it grows is great. I mean, you plant it now, there's really nothing else going on except for cleanup in your garden at this time of year. It sprouts and does most of its growth in the early spring and things before we have tons and tons of weed pressure. So I've just found it's a super easy one. It requires some work now ahead of time to get that crop in, late June or so, but really can be a productive one. So as far was the other part of the question maybe on establishment or
cultivation practices, really in general.
Yeah, my favorite part about garlic is that you get 2 harvests.
Yeah.
So in the
that's a good
spring,
point.
you get those garlic scapes, which are the flowering stems, which you really do want to remove from the plant.
You don't want to waste energy on
And they
flowers,
taste like garlic. So they make like excellent pesto and chop them up on the salad. And then you harvest in the middle of summer when the plant starts to brown up, and then you can actually save some of that to replant in the fall.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part. I love it when I can get two different
multiple
harvests
things from it. Yeah.
It's like beets. I love being able to harvest the greens and harvest the beets. That's my favorite part about. And as far as cultivation, I do think removing those flower scapes is very important. I do think there are watering when it's drought.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I've watered it a ton over the years, really.
Any additional,
just because of the timing of the part of the year, it's really not till into May, start of June, where things really start to kind of need watering and things. So you may have like a 4-week window in there you water the garlic, but it's not a huge. It's pretty resilient.
Pretty easy,
overall. Yeah.
Cool. We'll keep those questions coming into the comments here. We've got one more, and then we'll get to the ones that have come in today. Grant is asking about, he has an indoor Meyer lemon. He's brought it indoors, and it's showing some discoloration since he's done that in the last 2 days. Any leads on what might be going on? It's been outside all summer. It's done well. It's planted in a citrus cacti blend.
Citrus cacti plant.
I don't know. I think sometimes it's too quick of a change.
Yeah, I think a lot of, and this is like any plant you take from outside and bring it in, you tend to have that period of like shock from going to a well-lit, humid kind of outdoor to a still probably good amount of light, but darker inside.
Different.
Yeah,
Different
it's a
temperature,
everything.
Different humidity levels.
Everything's different.
No wind blowing on it inside.
Yeah.
That's a big change.
Yeah.
But...
So, Grant, I would just make sure that it's got plenty of light, whichever window you've decided to put it in. Kind of watch the watering, make sure you don't kind of overwater it when it's going through this kind of acclimation stage. But what might happen is it might drop some leaves. Those yellow leaves might drop, but it will probably likely then just put on a new kind of flush of leaves.
And sometimes it's just the shock of that change of light. If you don't have as sunny of a spot, and a lot of times I kind of don't worry about a little bit of that happening as I bring a plant in. But
as long as you still got some green.
So something to think about for next year is just maybe trying to transition it slowly inside. And I mean, I haven't been perfect at doing that with all my plants, but when you do, it's just... you bring it in, you bring it back out for an afternoon while you're maybe gone, and can bring it back in at night. And really, what I've tried to do is just not let it get as exposed to those colder night temperatures, but get it out during the day when there's sunlight and wind and all those things that it's used to. So.
Yeah, it's the same in the spring too. When you're trying to take it back outside, I've done that with succulents before, where I've just been lazy and I've just put them straight outside. And they usually get some kind of sunburn and like sun scald, and then they grow out of it. But
they're fine.
They're fine. They'll be fine. But I could prevent that a little bit if I did kind of transition it a little bit better.
It takes a lot of work to be doing that.
Sometimes you're a lazy gardener.
Just, Grant, make sure you don't overwater this plant.
Yeah, that's going to be your biggest thing.
You need it to dry down between waterings. And don't just look at the top of the soil. Look, I always go to the bottom where the drain holes are. And I stick my finger in there, and if it's wet, I don't water it. If it's dry, I water it.
Let it dry.
And so really letting it dry down and not killing off those roots, that's the biggest indoor houseplant mistake, is overwatering and killing roots.
For sure.
Yeah, because roots need oxygen too, and that water's filling up the pore spaces in there for oxygen. So.
Yeah, so don't love them too much, basically. Okay, great question. We've got another indoor question here from Emily. She has some succulents on her windowsill at home. They get plenty of light since they're in a windowsill, but can that hurt them as it gets colder? So being in the windowsill, can those cold temperatures affect your succulents? And I would say they could. If you have kind of an older window that tends to have a lot of draft coming through, it can get fairly cold, and sometimes it'll even frost inside kind of older windows like that. So it kind of depends on how insulated your windows are, really.
But I think, I've kind of went through this question before too, and I think you can kind of feel the window pane.
You'll know.
And if you move your hand away, you can see that about a few not too far away, it starts to feel warm again. You almost feel like a cold breeze coming off it on your hand. So you can kind of detect that zone there that's going to affect things. And I've definitely seen where those leaves of a plant that are kind of hanging into that 4 or 6 inch range show signs where the rest of the plant doesn't.
So I would just kind of check your windows this winter, Emily. Give them a feel really and see how it is, because the light is definitely important. But obviously you don't want those succulents getting below that kind of freezing point, because that is
but you definitely don't want to sacrifice light, because that's what I was kind of trying to weigh out with mine. Do I
light's
going to
be
back?
Important.
And I always say for succulents, 55 degrees or below, they do not like. So if you were to have a thermometer and it never went below 55 degrees in that area, I think you would be
fine. Yeah, and honestly, for the winter, they're mostly dormant. They're not going to be growing a whole lot. So cooler temperature, like in that upper 40s, 50 range, is not gonna
getting on the houseplant. That is my other pet peeve. Let's get it going here.
Here we go.
I can't stand it. Do not plant your plants up to a larger pot right now.
Yeah.
This is not
get that
the
a
time.
lot. Can I repot this?
I know you're bringing them in and you want them to look pretty, but this is not the time to repot your plants. All you're doing is potentially killing off the roots. Another thing that people tend to do is they'll have outside pots. Let's say they have a rosemary in there, and they want to dig that rosemary up and bring it inside. Well, you want to put it in a smaller pot. You don't want to put it in a big, gigantic pot. And you do want to cut some of that leaf tissue back, because you're stressing the plant out. Another thing is you don't fertilize during the winter.
And so the whole reason for all this is because they're pretty dormant during the winter.
The days are shorter, there's less light levels, the temperatures. It's giving the plant cues that, okay, it's time to just kind of go dormant and chill out. If we're repotting it and fertilizing, you're telling it the opposite. Like, keep growing, keep going.
And I know it doesn't always look the best, but be patient. Once you put it back out, it'll start looking amazing again. And if you have if you have lighting issues, I used to put a fluorescent bulb and just would have a little, I don't know what, not like that, but, would just have a little bulb over my plants. Yeah. And that just did so amazing for my plants. If you want them in a particular, you want them to look pretty, doing the kind of interior scaping thing. Yeah. But, you got to accept that they're not going to look perfect because they're not actively growing. They are dormant.
That's what they do. And that's a really good segue to our next question here from Cheryl. She's asking, what do you prefer to use to treat your plants with before bringing them indoors for the winter? And she has in parentheses creepy crawlies.
She must be talking about mealybugs.
Any kind of bug. So if something like hitching a ride on the plant that's been outside, bring it inside. We actually had somebody once, they didn't bring in a sample, but they brought some other in sample and told us this story that they brought in a plant from their deck, and they found a snake in their guest room where they had brought that plant in.
Nice.
And they were like, where did this snake come from? And we're like, well, did you bring a plant? Did you bring a plant inside? And it was, of course, in that pot. Honestly, what I typically do is bring them into the garage first. So go from outside to the garage. That allows kind of anything to come out of there. And what I typically do is just give them a really good shower, a really good bath. Either do it with the hose outside or put them in the shower and just hose down the above side, the underside of the leaves really well. Kind of soak that soil and kind of let it drain out. So I don't ever treat mine with anything. I just give them a good cleaning.
Yeah, I think you can knock a lot off with the hose outside.
Yeah.
Especially aphids, but mealybugs can be harder because sometimes they get into the soil area and they keep coming back, and you can wash them off and you can do the little Q-tip with the alcohol. But if you have a mealybug problem, I know I tried to organically fight a mealybug problem all last summer and last winter, and it did not work. So, but I know you can use a systemic granular that would, you add it to the soil and then you water it in, and then that chemical is taken up into the plant and that would kill the mealybugs.
So Cheryl, I would clean it up really good, and then after doing that, kind of give it a good inspection and identify what you actually have on there, whether it's mealybug or aphid or anything like
are
that.
white.
Yeah, mealybugs have that white kind of fuzzy growth on them.
Everything else, I think, is going to be knocked off by the water.
For the most part. Yeah, you might have. We get a lot of questions about fungus gnats, those little kind of flies that are typically around the soil in your pot. All you need to do for that is just to let it dry out, and that'll take care of those. But those are probably the two biggest ones. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so great questions, Cheryl. Rosie is asking, is it too late to plant or grow any veggies this fall in northern Illinois? What do you think? Anything that she can still plant?
She could do some baby greens.
Yeah, I was just thinking any of the leafy greens. You're not going to get a full-sized harvest, but you can harvest them when they're small and still get a pretty good harvest off of them.
And you guys have heard me say this before, 3 inches, they taste the best.
That's your favorite.
3 inches, they taste the best. And, you could get that in 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Yeah, so Rosie, try some of those leafy greens. And you can always get floating row cover, and you can cover things, too, when that frost is going to come.
And kale and Swiss chard are some of those that take those frosts.
Yeah, they'll tolerate.
Kale's a good one.
Tolerate those.
And a lot of times you can buy kale already as a plant this big if you find it.
Yeah, if you have transplants, you can even be faster. Yeah.
They're selling them right now, ornamental.
Yeah.
Well, be careful. You don't want the ornamental.
You don't.
kale.
Yeah. You don't know.
Yeah, I mean they're selling like the red boar as an ornament.
As an ornament.
Oh, right.
But yes, you're right. Thank you for saying that.
Well, because I was thinking there's lots of the ornamental kale.
That pretty ornamental kale, it doesn't taste as good as the red boar kale.
And you do never know what's on it either. There's that, yeah. Great question, Rosie. Keep those questions coming into the comments there. Katie has a question about bluebells. She has several dormant bluebells. When is the best time to plant them? Now, I would say, would be your best time, probably, Katie, because you want to get so I'm assuming you just have kind of bare root plants is probably what you have. So I would get them in the ground. They'll get some water. They'll start kind of putting on a little bit of a root system. And then in the spring, then hopefully they'll start to emerge for you.
Yeah, and keep some water on them if it gets real dry this fall.
Make sure you water them just so they do get those roots going. If you waited and stored them all winter, you're probably going to end up with a shriveled up plant by the time spring comes. They're going to run out of energy, so I do it now. Excellent. Let's see what we got here. Lauren has a question about dahlias. She's considering dahlias next year, but not sure I'm going to plant them right. Any advice? Plus, is it worth it to grow them given the trouble? I say yes, absolutely. It's worth it because I grow them for cut flowers. I grow a ton of dahlias. So if you are going to plant them next year, so if you're planning for spring, then that's great. You can kind of put your orders in now for the particular dahlias you want because some of them sell out pretty quickly. And then they're going to ship those to you then in the spring, so you don't have to worry about storing them this first winter. And then really, in terms of planting, you're going to do it in the spring. Once you can get out there, the ground's not frozen anymore. You can plant them pretty early in the spring. You just want to make sure that you basically bury the tuber. If you have them too close to the surface, they'll dry out. And if you have them too deep, they may not grow as well. So basically, you just kind of grow them with those tubers going downward, the tuberous roots, and then the growing point up. So honestly, they're pretty easy, Lauren. They're really not bad. I think a lot of people think they're hard, but honestly, they're not too bad.
Do you fertilize them?
I do, typically, just because I want a really big, lush plant that's going to produce a lot of flowers. So I tend to add like a granular fertilizer every once in a while in the season. But yeah, once they're growing, Lauren, then really the only thing you might have to do is stake them. They can get kind of floppy, but other than that, they're pretty easy. Definitely try it out. Dahlias are the bomb. Okay, let's see what else we got. Janice is asking another houseplant comment here. So you said it's not the time to replant houseplants. I have a Christmas cactus that needs a new pot, and I've been procrastinating. So, Janice, I would keep procrastinating.
Or she could plant it in the same size pot, let's say it's a 6-inch and you just replace the pot.
Yeah, if you're just
If
needing
it's,
like a
cracked
new,
or something.
yeah, if there's a reason you just need a new pot, something like that. But I wouldn't take it now and get it into a new pot and add more soil and do all that, because now is the time that actually you probably have a Thanksgiving cactus, but also Christmas cactus. Now's the time that they're initiating flower buds. These short days, that's what's gonna produce those flowers on that. So if you repot it now and if you kind of damage the root system, you might throw that off a little bit.
Yeah.
And Christmas cactus and Thanksgiving cactus, don't we let them get root bound?
Oh yeah,
let them
for
stay
sure.
in a 6-inch
They'll live
pot for 10 years.
100 years in a pot. People have 100-year-old Christmas, man. So, and honestly, you're not going to kill it if you did that. But in terms of best practices, you're better off to wait if you can. So try that out, Janice. Okay, Cheryl's got another question here. She grows ornamental gingers. She brought them back from Hawaii, and this year I think I just want to harvest, and it doesn't show me the rest of her comment. So hold on, Cheryl. Let me see if I can get it to. There we go. Let's see. So she grows ornamental gingers, brought them back from Hawaii. This year I think I just want to harvest and save the rhizomes to plant next spring, rather than keeping the entire plant over winter. So what's the best way to store them over winter? Well, that's a great question. And this kind of relates to the dahlia question, or cannas or gladiolus. Any of those bulbs or rhizomes or tubers that they're not perennials, we have to dig them up and store them for the winter. Really what you're wanting, Cheryl, is cool and dry. That's your goal here, is to keep them in a cool, dry location. If it's too warm, they're going to use up a lot of the energy they have stored in that bulb or rhizome, so they're going to be shriveled up by the time spring comes. And if it's too moist, they can rot. Okay, so keep them cool, dry. I tend to do like my dahlias in sawdust or vermiculite or newspaper, some kind of medium that kind of keeps them dry. And you want above freezing, but I would say below like 45, 50. So it's kind of hard to find the right spot.
So it's not just a corner of your basement.
No, if in a basement can work if it's cool enough. But a lot of times our basement isn't quite cool enough. Or the garage will work, but you got to make sure it doesn't freeze. But it's
when
still,
it gets down to 0 degrees.
Yeah. So I do put mine in my garage because it is heated. But I keep it in that 40 degree range, and it seems to work pretty well.
That's what I've always done, is just put them in my garage.
Yeah.
And then let the foliage die down, and then water them and fertilize them the following spring.
Yeah, and really it's kind of like, woohoo, they're alive. It's like there's no, your percentage, you're probably never going to have 100% survival rate on anything. If I get like half of my dahlias tubers that are still looking good in the spring, I'm pretty happy. Just because if I had a cooler, that'd be awesome if I could just put them in the cooler and let them go, but most of us don't have that, so we just have to find the right spot.
So save extra.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, save extra so that you have what. So if you have those gingers, hopefully you have several so that you kind of have like a backup in case. Yeah, but I do think that would be easier than trying to keep a whole plant for the winter. Definitely. Yeah. Awesome, great questions, Cheryl. Keep those questions coming in the comments. We've had some great questions this week. Katie has a question about peonies. Man, this is a flower week. This is awesome.
I know.
I love it.
The next person has to ask Ryan a question.
We need
about
an insect
trees.
question or a tree question.
We're like sitting, Ryan and I we're just
okay.
I'll let this Candice answer the question today.
That's okay. I like flower questions
good. Flowers
too.
are the bomb.
We're learning.
I know. Okay, so Katie has a question about peonies that aren't thriving, mostly because they don't get a lot of sun. So she wants to know, when should I transplant, fall or spring? Any advice on planting? I've heard the planting depth can be tricky. Will they bloom spring after the move? Okay. So now is a great time to transplant, actually. Fall is the ideal time to plant peonies, to divide peonies, to move them. So go ahead and do it now. Water them this fall to kind of get some roots growing. And you're right about planting depth. You want to make sure that you're not burying those peony eyes, basically the growing points. So you actually are planting them pretty shallowly. And yeah, you should get a little bit of bloom in the spring. If you do it now, get a good root established, you should get a little bit of bloom in the spring. Yeah. Anybody ever moved peonies before?
I just wrote an article on them.
I mean, in general, like perennials I transplant in the fall, I try and put a little mulch on.
Yeah, give them a little extra insulation. But yeah, you're doing the right thing. If you left them in that shady spot, they're never going to flower good. So you are better off moving them, Katie, for sure. Okay, keep those questions coming. I think we've gotten through the questions here in our comments. So let's take a look. See, we've got about 20 minutes left still, so keep those questions coming. Do you want to talk about some of the other stuff we're seeing in the garden lately? So,
Sure.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I know we have pictures of a couple of other things that we've been seeing in the garden, but I can't remember what was next.
We could do the fall webworm.
So let's
we
see
could
what
have Ryan
comes up.
talk about the fall webworm.
You want to talk about webworm?
Yeah.
That's a cool one. Get
Fall
some insect
webworm,
stuff.
yeah,
Okay,
that's
let's
good
do
one.
it.
So, fall webworm is an insect that we see a lot of times now. You see a picture of it here. It's little silken webs in trees, and it can be a small tree or usually a lot of times in a mature tree up in the canopy. And so what's going on here is those caterpillars inside that web are spinning that web as they eat the foliage, and they're protecting themselves with that web. In general, I don't see this as a huge problem. It doesn't really threaten, it's not going to kill your tree per se. It's really, to me, is more of an aesthetic thing, where if it's, the centerpiece crabapple in your front yard that has 5 of these in it, you may want to take them out. But it's not something that is detrimental to tree health that we control. They're really only impacting that little bit of an area of a limb that they start to cover their web with. So really, for the most part, I've had pretty good control on that crabapple that's right in the middle of my yard that I wanted to take care of by just picking apart that web a little bit and trying to remove as many of them as I can. And, natural predators will actually get in there and eat some of them when you break up the web.
Birds love caterpillars, yeah.
Yeah, so nature can kind of do it for you. Another method is to use a hose with a little bit of pressure if you can't reach it, and spray some of that out. Just whatever you can do to kind of disturb that nest a little bit is my best recommendation. Now, I know there probably are things you could spray. Kelly, do you know if there's recommendations for that? I just really have never sprayed for these.
I do teach the recommendations, but I don't know the sprays right offhand.
Okay,
Usually,
well,
I think it probably is BT, but
but
Bacillus thuringiensis.
But the issue with spraying, though, is getting it into that web.
Yeah.
So that's some of the problem, too, that you almost need to either have a high enough pressure sprayer that you're getting it into the web, or break the web up a little bit anyway, and I feel like you've already kind of started to do
which is why
process.
You have to do the spray before the web.
Yeah.
And when to spray is when the goldenrod starts to bloom.
Oh.
There you go.
And another thing is, when you're breaking up that web, is sometimes they try to leave that nest and go and feed on other parts of the tree, and then they come back to the nest. So they say cloudy days is when you want to go and prune out those nests. Not that I see them, in the nest all the time. Cloudy, windy. I know that's what they say.
Yeah.
But that's another one where if you do have this problem and you do want to spray, I think it's when the goldenrod have been blooming for a while now.
Yeah, so it's a little late too.
So, they've already built the nest at this point, but that would be when they start to hatch and their caterpillars are starting to roam around the tree, is when they're the most susceptible, when the goldenrod starts to bloom.
I guess I've found in my experience it's hard to figure it out until you have a big web. So it's kind of hard to spray ahead of time. I don't know, but
well, when we tell people about tree insects and tree pests, we're like, okay, so for next year.
Yeah.
Like you have a tree disease, for next year, because there's no curative to tree diseases.
Yeah.
And most of the time when it comes to insects, it's really hard to control large populations with one.
Once you find them, too. I think that's a big problem, is a lot of times we don't detect them until they're beyond controllable size.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one that we get a lot of questions about this time of year, and really, in my opinion, it's not something you need to worry about a lot.
No, it's not going to kill the tree.
Yeah.
So.
And the reason is because the tree is photosynthesized already a lot this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if it were to completely be decimated by these caterpillars, it would still be okay.
Yeah. So what Kelly's talking about
A
is
deciduous
you know,
tree,
every
which
year
I-
a deciduous tree has to produce enough energy from its leaves throughout the summer to store in its roots so it can leaf out next spring. At this point of the season, all that storage has happened for the most part. Yeah, they're still photosynthesizing and producing energy, but for the most part, trees have got most of what they're going to get out of the year at this point. So yeah, at this stage of the season, defoliating just a tiny branch is really a drop in the bucket.
Yeah,
So.
and that's deciduous trees we're talking. So
Right.
if you think back to those bagworm pictures we were showing, there was a pair of 2 spruce trees that were just completely defoliated
Now,
from bagworm.
they can't be defoliated.
That's a different
different.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah. When a conifer and evergreen is defoliated, they don't leaf out again typically.
No, that evergreen is pretty
It's
dead.
toast. Yeah, and there's the picture there. That is dead.
Yeah,
So
they just work differently than deciduous trees.
Yeah, they just
you know?
don't. Yeah.
They don't have a lot of secondary buds to regrow from.
Yeah.
You know, there's so.
Yeah, it's just how it is. Just how it is. Okay, let's see here. I think we've got a couple things come in here. Lauren, I think you put in a picture, I'm assuming, but for some reason I don't see it. Because Deborah said it also happens to her dahlias too. So maybe try that again if you can, or we might just have to get you to email it afterwards because for some reason I don't see anything in there. So let's see what else we've got. A question from someone here that lives in Georgia.
Whoa.
So hello from
Alright.
Georgia. They have Bermuda grass in their lawn that has brown spots like a dollar patch in their lawn. You got any ideas? We don't grow much Bermuda grass. Do we
don't
here in
really.
Illinois? Because Bermuda is a warm season grass, right? If I remember right. Yeah. Maybe what I would do is you could send a sample that to our plant clinic if you wanted to. If you Google the University of Illinois Plant Clinic, they take samples from everywhere.
I bet you the University of Georgia
And I'm sure
has-
your university does as well.
You guys have some amazing horticulturists there.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I bet you that university would, or the extension office would, you know, take a picture, send them some pictures.
Yeah. Yeah, either our plant clinic or see if, I'm sure your university has it as well. Because there are definitely disease problems on turf that can happen, especially if it's moist conditions. If you've had a lot of rain, obviously I don't know what your weather conditions have been like, but if you've had a lot of rain, that's certainly possible.
Or if you've mowed when the grass is wet, that could be a great way to spread it around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For those people in Illinois, if you do have grass issues, now is an amazing time to take a soil test.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because most of the time, you can't just solve grass issues or even some of the tree issues with just one treatment or something. That you really need to solve the underlying problem, and usually it's the soil. Maybe the soil is compacted. Maybe it doesn't drain very well. Maybe it has, too much organic matter. Like we had a puffball mushrooms come into the our help desk yesterday, and it was like, I had to tell them that mushrooms grow on organic matter. Okay, well, what do I do? Well, there's nothing you can really do. The puffballs are going to keep going until the organic matter is gone, unless you want to go in there and try to scrape out the organic matter, which I don't know who would do that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But
almost impossible to do.
Yeah. So check with your local university. There's the link to our plant clinic. You're welcome to check out. We also have a really great lawn website too, the Lawn Talk website. So if you need any info about lawns, whether it's the type of seed to plant, when to do it, when to fertilize, check out our Lawn Talk website. I go to that a lot.
Yeah,
but it is kind of for Illinois.
Well, sure, yeah. So for you in particular, you're going to want Georgia-based information.
But you could, the cultural practices.
Oh yeah,
would
the management
apply
would work.
to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey, thanks for contacting us.
Yeah,
from
thanks for
Georgia.
watching us.
Love Georgia.
Yeah.
Love the university down there.
We'll come visit. Yeah.
We'll come visit.
Okay, Lauren's got some more info here. So what she was talking about, she has a diseased peony. The buds form, they start to open, but the flowers kind of fold in on themselves. They never fully open. And the petals are kind of brownish looking. So to me, that probably sounds like botrytis blight, is what I'm thinking. Lauren, that's definitely something you could send to the plant clinic and find out for sure. But botrytis blight is definitely fairly common on peony. And if it does infect early in the season, it can affect the flowers. But then later in the season, what you're going to see on the foliage are those dark brown spots. So look at your foliage this time of year and see if you see that. And if you do, it's probably botrytis that you have there. What you can do for that is there are some fungicides preventative. You got to do it early in the season that you can do, or really just kind of thinning out the plant a little bit, increasing the air movement is usually what we recommend, because there's so much dense foliage on a peony. If you prune some of that out, increase the air movement, keep the foliage dry, that tends to help a little bit, is what I would say.
I concur.
Very good. Excellent.
I like to pinch the botrytis stuff off too, but
yeah, you can definitely
that's
cut out those parts too. Absolutely. Okay, let's see. Dorothy has a question about soil testing. Should we soil test in the vegetable garden in fall or spring?
Before we leave the botrytis question,
yes,
tell her. Oh, I'll tell her.
You tell her. You can tell her.
Don't water at night.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't let that foliage ever have moisture, because that botrytis will just move rapidly.
Yeah. And you're probably going to get powdery mildew too, which is pretty common on peony too. So water earlier in the day, keep the foliage dry. Yeah.
Soil test in vegetable gardens.
Soil test.
The reason
fall
why
or spring.
I love doing it in the fall is because usually when they come back and they tell you what, there's something wrong with your pH. What's normally wrong with your pH? It's too high. Plants tend to like a lower pH than what we have here in Illinois. So you want to, treat that pH with sulfur. That sulfur tends to lower the pH. Well, if you test it in the fall, then you can do an elemental sulfur, which is cheap. Mm-hmm. And it takes the entire winter for it to start to break down and start to amend the soil. But if you wait until the spring, you kind of have to add sulfur with other stuff. Mm-hmm. Ammonia sulfur, aluminum sulfur. And I just think we as a society over-fertilize our vegetable gardens. Especially if you're adding organic matter, you probably don't need fertilizer.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of adding my sulfur with other stuff. I want to be, I want to put what I want to put
just
in there.
Just add the thing you need.
Yeah. So get that test in the fall.
And it's really easy to apply. Granular product, you spread out on the ground.
It's just like...
Yeah. And Dorothy, if you tell them on that soil test, and we've got a link there to soil test labs, but you can go into any extension office and they'll give you the kit that you'll mail in. Most extension offices, I should say.
Not all extension offices call ahead of time.
What you'll put on that form then is what you're growing. So if you put vegetable garden on that form for the lab, they will typically send you back that report with recommendations of how much to add. So if you do need to raise that or lower that pH, it'll say add this many pounds of sulfur. So
and they may not go, okay, you're going to have to add this sulfur. They may say, oh, you're going to have to address this issue for the next 3 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're going to have to add a little bit of sulfur at a time, and you can't always solve the issue. Yeah. But, they give you really great recommendations. I love the soil labs. I used to have to interpret that myself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't have to interpret it myself because they're really great at...
Well, and they have great folks on staff to answer your questions and follow up. Even once you get the report, if you still have questions, they have agronomists on staff that are more than happy to answer your questions. You're a paying customer to this lab, so use the services they have.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's like, I'm getting another soil test, but I had a soil test last year of a vegetable garden that I'm working on, and I had extreme levels of phosphorus and potassium and high levels of organic matter. And so I think, definitely there's something else going on with that. And I'm going to do some further testings, maybe some metal testings. But I did not fertilize this year because I knew I had so much in the so much already in the soil that I had to really think about what I was doing. And all I really need is nitrogen. But I had so much organic matter that I didn't think I needed nitrogen. And so they test phosphorus and potassium, which are very integral to plant growth. They don't test nitrogen because the rate can change hourly. And it can be very difficult for them. They test organic matter. Usually most organic matters are really low, but lately some of the tests I've had have been high. I think it's just because we're using compost and stuff.
Yeah, well, I think we're more cognizant of adding organic matter now. Yeah. We've got 5 minutes left, guys. So if you've got a lingering question, put it in the comments, and we will try to get to it in our last 5 minutes here. But I think we've gotten to all of the here in the chat. So what do you think? What do you want to talk about in the last 5 minutes? You want to talk about?
Well, next time we're on air, I think we should talk about bulbs because October is
I almost mentioned that when you're talking about garlic, because the other way to think about when should I plant the garlic is also the same time as you should plant your fall
And you
bulbs.
can even plant garlic later than fall bulbs.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So October is going to be the perfect time to plant bulbs. We're going to talk about, you'll probably talk about your favorite cut flower bulbs.
Of course, yeah.
I'll tell you the myths of growing bulbs, and
I'll
I'll
talk
tell you
about
what
trees.
bulbs can grow under trees.
Bulbs are actually great to grow under trees.
Yeah, they are actually
They come
great.
up so early before most trees are even leafed out that they get plenty of sunlight before the trees even leaf out. So.
They just really don't compete with trees that much.
No,
That's the great thing about having them under a tree.
And even though in my research, bulbs aren't the most preferred plants by spring bees, they do supply nectar when they are definitely in need. And so if you're an environmentalist gardener, I don't know if there's a
environmentally conscious.
Sure.
Environmentally conscious gardener.
There you go.
We're thinking about, planting those early spring bulbs for the bees or something that flowers early. One of Candice's favorite plants is Jacob's ladder.
I love Jacob's ladder.
Which is another great plant for the bees. I mean, they love that plant. And then, so planting now, I love it when the bulbs come up and I'm like, winter is
finally spring is coming.
It's
always that great sign. Yeah, and you can really time it, that glory of the snow and some of those really early things are going to be coming first, and then the daffodils and the tulips follow. So it's pretty cool to kind of see them all come up in different successions. So go shopping now. I just bought some bulbs today actually at the garden center because they're out now, and then we'll talk next time kind of about planting. It's still a little early to get them in the ground. It's kind of like the garlic. You don't want to give them enough time to start shooting up some growth. Just enough time to kind of get some roots going. So.
And I've been doing a lot of research, so I have a lot of advice on planting, and I call it busting the spring bulb planting myths.
Okay.
Because I'm going to tell you everything you're doing wrong.
So stay tuned. So we will be back next time. You can always hopefully you already have liked the University of Illinois Extension Facebook page, because that's where your notifications are going to come from for when our next live session is. So we hope to you'll join us again for the next Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, great questions today.
Yeah.